Welcome back to Afternoons at 4BC. Well, earlier in the week, I did speak about the strange feeling that comes with returning from a holiday right now. For me, it was a weird mix of gratitude, but also a fair bit of guilt, knowing that so many of us are choosing between, buying groceries and paying for petrol. Taking a break feels like a luxury that a lot of us simply can't justify right now. At the same time, though, we're seeing so much stress has just become background noise and burnout is completely normalized. I want to chat to our friend, Dr. Rachel Hannam, the clinical director of North Brisbane Psychologists, just what might be behind this holiday guilt and whether it's okay just to take a breath and take a moment out of this every day so they're not passing each other's company at home like co-workers and we actually can reconnect with family in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us here on 4BC Afternoons.
Hi, Carla. Thank you for having me.
All right, Dr. Rachel, I want to ask, let's start with the guilt part because I think now I realize what mother's guilt is and parents' guilt is. That's one other thing altogether. But why is it so hard for us to just relax and take a break right now? Why do we have to give ourselves permission, I guess, to switch off without feeling bad about it?
Yeah, I think a major reason, Carla, is we live in a culture and a society now more than ever where, we feel like we should always be productive. And if we rest, then we're not being productive. And if money feels tight, that's going to be even more pronounced. Our brains link our worth with our output and our productivity. And then we treat rest as if it's some sort of reward for being productive and having got a lot done. But actually, it's not a reward. Rest is a biological requirement. If we don't actually rest our brains, if we don't switch off, our health is affected, our performance, our decision making, and in the end, our potential to actually, make a living could be affected long term. I've worked with people who've been very burnt out. But yeah, I think it's in our culture.
I mentioned on Monday that for so many of us, stress has just become this sort of benchmark. It's become background noise. But what happens
Yeah.
to us and our brains and our bodies physically when we live in this sort of constant state of low grade burnout?
Well, of course, it affects our health, but it puts us into a physiological state where I can't really go into it in great detail, but it triggers something which we call schemas, psychological schemas, which means our filters, our perceptual filters, become quite biased, and we get confirmation bias. If I'm not working, then I'm looking for all the things I'm not doing. It affects how we perceive the world, and it also means we don't notice the warning signs in our body. So when we are getting irritable, our focus and concentration is poor, we feel fatigued, we actually stop paying attention and noticing because we are in that chronic state of stress, and we get into sort of physical mental loops where we kind of get stuck in that mode.
Mm.
And the risk is it erodes our self-awareness as well as our mental and physical health. And over time, we can end up with physical illness, anxiety, depression, panic attacks. It's a bit like we keep driving the car even though the warning lights are flashing and we're just ignoring them.
That's a great analogy. But sometimes it's hard to know, like, make sense of what those red flags are. Like, like for myself, I get short tempered with the people around me. Obviously, my loved ones, not my coworkers, because that then I would be unemployed. Or maybe I do. I don't know. But it's always the people that are closest to you are the ones. For me, I notice that I lash out a lot quicker than I should when I just haven't obviously had enough sleep, or I'm feeling extra stressed, or all of the noise becomes a constant hum.
Exactly. And then we can end up in a really negative feedback loop where we feel guilty and ashamed for being irritable and taking out our stress on our loved ones. And then we feel worse and we feel more
Yeah.
stressed. So we need to look at this as signs and symptoms of stress, not as indicators of our true character. So we're looking out instead for signs and symptoms of stress. I kicked the dog, I yelled at my kid, I keep forgetting things. It's affected, all sorts of things behaviorally, cognitively, physically, emotionally. So if we can tune into those different levels where we experience stress and look for the signs and symptoms of stress, then we can see it for what it is. And it's data. It's our bodies telling us that we need something that we're not getting.
Speaking of data, a third of Australians, this is a recent study from Finder, I think it was, a third of Australians haven't had a proper holiday in over 2 years, simply put because
Mhm.
they cannot afford it. So how do you genuinely disconnect? You know, I've said that a staycation sometimes is a good, just a break from the norm, but you're at home. So how do you get that holiday feeling, I guess, without spending a lot of
Mm.
money or, with
Mm.
recognizing that there are those warning lights that are on and that you should be taking time out?
Mm. Well, yeah, first of all, yeah, what you just said made me remember that sometimes, and with my clients as well, I want to acknowledge the realities. For some people, they've got big mortgages and kids, and there's certain realities. They can't just, go and have a 3-month sabbatical,
Mm.
in a tropical island or something. But what a holiday does is it breaks the psychological routine, that hamster wheel that I was talking about, where we're just the background noise that you mentioned. So what we're really trying to do is break that physiological state that we're in, a routine. And so, it could be small things that we can do to have a bit of a reset. And I've talked with clients about all sorts of things, turning off notifications on your phone,
Yeah.
um, limiting how much news and social media you're consuming, making different days. So you've got at least one day of the week where you're baking or gardening or, something that's more embodied, body-based, because we're so language-based and mentally based in our work a lot of the time that a non-verbal activity like gardening or even housework, if we do it with a different mindset, means that we can turn it into some sort of ritual where, we're going for our morning walk and instead of ruminating about work, we make a conscious intention to rest our brain. Or we change our environment, something to signal to our brain that we're off duty, that we're resting now. And I know people can't always take big holidays, but, we can probably find a day a week to do that, or even just 10 or 15 minutes of real rest during the day. And it's hard because we're in habits like picking up our phone and scrolling,
Yeah.
and we're all in the habit of multitasking. So when you notice that you're doing that habitual thing, you're sitting down or lying down and you pick up your phone and you're scrolling, that's not really resting your brain.
Yeah.
And that can actually keep the stress and cortisol levels going. So it's about becoming more deliberate. Okay, I'm sitting down now, I'm having a rest. Don't pick up your phone. Learn some breathing exercises, or go outside and sit on the grass or look at the sky or pull out some weeds or go for that walk without, listening to a podcast. It has to be something that breaks the habituation, the pattern that we've all kind of got ourselves into in this modern world. No one else is going to do it for you, so you have to make a decision to, actually recover in whatever ways your life allows you to be, just to recharge that battery, reset.
Dr. Rachel Hannam is our guest right now, the clinical director of North Brisbane Psychologists. I know that there will be a lot of people who are nodding along to everything that you've just said. I'm guilty of always being on my phone. And in that week out, I made a really conscious decision to not always check my phone and to be with the people that I was on holidays with. We surrounded ourselves with family and just to stop and have conversation, even if it's about nothing. It wasn't about
Mm.
news and bad news cycle and worrying about fuel and just taking that time out really made me realize how reliant I am. And it's important. It is part of my job, but I know that there would be a lot of people who are nodding along right now. But, and
Mm.
for some of us, for most of us, we literally cannot afford to stop working right now, or we can't take a day off, or,
Mm.
we can't take a day off from
Yeah.
thinking about whether or not, there's enough money to get through to the end of the month to cover rent and all those sorts of things. How do we
Yeah.
avoid, and I put it as a term, pouring from an empty tank, because that's how I felt like I was going.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So you've acknowledged again, some of those realities that we may not be able to change right now. Here's a practical exercise that is so simple everyone can do. Pull out a piece of paper, old school, and a pen, and write 2 lists. Write a list of all the things that add stress, and even in micro ways like scrolling, sometimes that adds stress. Ruminating about, the cost of petrol or other things out of your control that create stress. Certain interactions that you don't have to have maybe create stress. So a long list of all the things that you know add stress to your life, some of which may be avoidable and some are not. And then make a second list of all the things that help. And just try to think of everything that has ever helped. And I keep it broad, like what helps, instead of adding more stress. And then even things that you haven't done that you think might help. So that when you want to break the cycle, and stick that list on your bedroom wall or on your fridge or somewhere where you can see it, and you've got a list ready of all the things that help, and right down to the littlest things. My client brought this list in the other day, and she had, wine, although she'd been using alcohol to kind of reduce the stress when she got home, which is a very common, understandable thing to do, to put it into the list of things that add stress. And then she had all these other activities she could do that help. And it was about engaging, and we can make memories when we do the things that help. We don't usually have memories of, mundane, routine things, but going out into the garden, going and doing a new thing that's social, connecting with people, these are the sorts of things we remember, and they're often the sorts of things that help. So making those two lists and keeping that front of mind so that you can become more conscious or more deliberate about how you're living. Because, we can get to the point where we think, I need to quit my job, I need to move to South America.
That'd be nice.
But that's, well, we think that'd be nice, but it doesn't usually help. Some of my clients are doctors and professionals, and they have that fantasy. But when we really think it through, actually they realise taking 1 week off every 8 weeks is probably a better way, stagger out that sabbatical over time rather than just throwing in the towel for 3 or 6 months. We don't want to actually get to that point where we want to run away from our lives. We want to redesign our lives. And sometimes that is hard to take a week off every 3 months. And so then it might be, well, I have to take half a day where I turn my phone off completely and do the things on that list of the things that help. It is about redesigning our lives as best we can, because we have to focus on what is in our control. The more we focus on the things out of our control, like, politics, like the price of petrol, the weather, we stress ourselves out because we can't do anything. So it is about, that list is sort of like, well, these are things in my control, and I want to come back to that circle of control, because there are always things we can do that will help.
I feel just far more relaxed now having chatted to you. Dr. Rachel Hannam, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate the perspective that you give, and that we shouldn't feel guilty about taking time out, because I think it makes us all, like I said, if you feel like you're pouring from an empty tank, it's not good for anyone. You're not useful to anyone. So I love the strategies that you've given us here. I really appreciate the time.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much as well for your feedback. 0499 880 882. Paul is prolific. Paul has sent through a text. Very funny what you say is stress. Everyday people call normal. Yeah, you've got it tough. Paul, that's exactly the point. We have normalized this stress and the pressures that we're all feeling. It's all relative, and you can't yuck someone else's yum. Maybe they can't cope with an everyday stress that you think is completely normal. But the point is, we're all trying to get through this, and we should all try and get through it together, which seems very egalitarian. It seems very altruistic, and I don't know if it's possible. But the point is, we have normalized feeling so highly strung and stressed that sometimes it's hard to see the forest from the trees, and then you're no good to anyone. Except for me, Paul. I appreciate it, because you can text through anytime. 0499 880 882.